We heard from Jay Powell. We've heard from him the last 3 years at Jackson Hole. You weren't too pleased when he had his framework a couple of years ago. You weren't too pleased about his transitory talk. Did you feel a little better this year?
Look, I think he did what he needed to do. It was clear that inflation is the overwhelming priority. It was clear, despite some earlier confused talk about neutral, that he was under no illusion that monetary policy was in an appropriate place right now. It was clear that whatever the academic arguments about demand shocks versus supply shocks said, the Fed couldn't accept continuing high inflation and had to act until it was clear that that was going away. The remarks were very concise. There wasn't a lot of more academic discussion, but there was a statement of being resolute. So I think that's just right. So I think the Fed is positioned as well as it can be, given the credibility losses and mistakes that there have been, with these remarks to manage things going forward.
The chair never used the word recession. At the same time, he did talk about below-trend growth for an extended period of time, also elevated interest rates for a good time to come. Is he really pointing to a recession? Is he between the lines saying, get ready for it?
I think he also had a reference to the fact that there was going to be pain. He wasn't predicting recession, and after all, even someone who's quite pessimistic about the situation like me is saying that there's a 75% chance of recession in the next 2 years. But he was clearly showing an awareness of the possibility, indeed possibly even the likelihood of recession. And I think that was very important, because saying you're against inflation when there's no price to resisting inflation or bringing down inflation isn't a consequential statement. Today, he prioritized inflation, making clear that he recognized that that prioritization would have short-term adverse consequences that wouldn't be easy, but that by bringing down inflation, ultimately there were going to be more jobs with higher real wages for more people. And that's, after all, what economic policy is all about. It was a big change from the Jay Powell of a couple of years ago, who was speaking about the importance of maximizing employment without an awareness of the issues of sustainability and long-run economic performance. So I was quite pleased with these remarks.
So let's go over to Europe for a moment, because they have their own problems over there. The ECB is indicating further tightening, perhaps. At the same time, they're in for what looks like a substantial energy supply shock, particularly as we get into the winter. Are we properly appraising what is going on in Europe and how bad it could be?
Christine Lagarde's got a much harder job right now than Jay Powell does. She's got the dilemmas of inflation, but she's got a truly massive supply shock with what's happened there with natural gas and electricity prices. She has the set of challenges of monetary union, problematic politics in Italy, very high debts in the European periphery. So they've got a very, very difficult set of balances. And they also have the challenge of a credible currency as the euro moves to and through parity with the dollar. So I think it's going to be a very difficult road for them to walk in Europe. My suspicion would be that they're going to have to raise rates more than is currently priced in, but that's going to come at a time when there's very substantial recessionary forces in Europe. And I'm concerned about what that's going to mean for intra-European politics. And I'm also concerned ultimately, and what I think is probably most important, is how it affects Europe's fortitude in this very difficult world we have with a revanchist Russia and an aggressive China.
Larry, back in the United States, one big development this week was President Biden announcing his plan for relief, at least partial relief, from student debt loads. We heard Jason Furman, somebody you know well, I respect him as well. He had some tweets that were, I think, among other things, said this was pouring gasoline on an inflation fire. What did you make of that policy change by the administration?
I did not support large-scale student debt relief because I thought it was using federal resources to make transfers, hundreds of billions of dollars, and I would have liked those resources put to better use, helping people who were poorer, who were more in need, and who would use the money to invest more in the future of the economy. I think that it does add to demand, which does increase inflationary pressures, but that's something that the Fed should be able to offset. But it will mean more need for the Fed to move rates. And I think it needs to be recognized that this is something that's meaningful relative to all the other things that are going on. It's not the policy I would have preferred, but if this is our biggest mistake, we will be doing very well. And you know, this is several $100 billion over 10 years. What we did in 2021 was several $1 trillion over 1 year. So we just need to keep perspective on the scale of this.
Larry, you have helped set economic policy both at the Treasury and at the White House. Was this the economists talking, or was it the politicians talking? And some people, as you know, are starting to say serious economists are not having enough of a say in this White House.
Look, I'm somebody who always believes that you can't go wrong listening more to economics. I think in response to many of the frustrations going back to the financial crisis, there has been some movement away from relying on economists' advice. I think over time that will tend to lead to mistakes because you'll focus on the direct consequences of things and fail to recognize the indirect consequences. For example, you'll miss the inflationary consequences of protectionism. You'll tend to focus on what's good about spending and not focus on the things that are crowded out. So yeah, I would like to see more influence, but I also think that the economics profession has got to do better in recognizing the kinds of concerns that led to the terrible populism that we've seen in many parts of the country. And we need, as economists, to be understanding rather than just dismissing those problems.
Finally, briefly here at the end, I always love to talk about golf. You're a serious golfer. I try to golf some. In the meantime, we have the Department of Justice reportedly investigating the possibility of an antitrust suit against the PGA Tour, I guess because of Live Golf. What do you make of that?
I don't know anything about the merits, but it's just hard to believe that there isn't a higher priority for the use of taxpayers' money in the antitrust area than protecting Bryson DeChambeau from exploitation. I just find it hard to see why, of all the issues that they could work on, that would be the one they would choose. Again, I have no knowledge of the merits, and certainly civil suits back and forth are part of what happens in situations like this, but I did wonder why this was something the Justice Department was taking on.